The African sun beat down upon the dry, cracked earth of the Masai Mara, turning the endless grassland into a shimmering, golden expanse. It was a place of brutal beauty, where life and death were two sides of the same coin, and every moment was a test of survival. In this immense, ancient landscape, a drama was unfolding, small in scale, but epic in its crushing sorrow. It centered around a creature barely bigger than a house cat, yet bearing the future of a king, a lion cub. He was tiny, perhaps only 8 weeks old, his coat still mottled with the soft spots of infancy, a camouflage meant to hide him safely in the shadows of the tall, dry grass. But there were no shadows now, only the relentless midday glare, and no safety, only the vast, indifferent wilderness. He was alone. His name, if he had been old enough to know one, would have been simply Milo to those who observed his world as small name for a small bundle of distress. Milo's world had shrunk from the comforting warmth of his mother's side and the playful jostling of his siblings to a confusing, terrifying void. The last memory he clung to was the terrifying scent of a rival male lion, a scent that had instantly shattered the peace of their morning rest. His mother, fierce and swift, had ushered her small litter into hiding before turning to face the threat. The roar that followed had been a sound of thunder and fury, a sound that drove the small cub deeper into the thorny acacia bush where he was told to wait. He waited. He waited for the scent of her return, the reassuring lick of her tongue, the sound of her soft, rumbling purr. He waited until the smell of dust replaced the smell of danger, and the shadows stretched long and thin, only to retreat and leave the sun high above once more. He waited too long. When he finally dared to peek out, the pride was gone. The world was silent, except for the frantic thumping of his own tiny heart and the distant, mocking call of a crested francolin. Milos, lost. His cries began a soft, plaintive mews, barely audible above the whisper of the breeze through the dry grass stalks. They were the instinctive sound of a child calling for comfort, a sound guaranteed to bring a mother-swift response in a normal world. But this was not a normal world. This was a place where such a sound was less a beacon of reunion and more a dinner bell for opportunistic predators. He began to walk, driven by a primal urge to find familiarity. His little legs, still wobbly from the ease of den life, struggled to push through the resistant thicket. The dust quickly coated his eyes and nose, making every hesitant step an effort. He moved without direction, sniffing at the ground, hoping to catch the powerful, musky aroma that signified his mother. He found only the scent of dry soil, antelope droppings, and the metallic tang of fear. The hours crawled by, each one stretching the cub's desperation to a sharper point. The heat was becoming unbearable, baking his sensitive skin and clouding his vision. He hadn't nursed since the previous evening, and the gnawing ache of hunger was now compounding the ache of loneliness. He stumbled over a loose rock, letting out a louder, more genuine wail, this time a sound raw with despair. This cry was different. It wasn't just a call, it was a sob, the sound of a broken instinct, the sound of a baby who knew deep down in his fragile spirit that he was truly, irrevocably alone. He curled up beneath a sparse, thorny bush, seeking the meager shade. His eyes, large and dark, were now wet with actual, visible tears. They were not the manufactured, dry-eyed cries of a human child, but the physiological response of a small body in extreme stress and dehydration, combined with the pure, existential grief of a mammal separated from its primary source of safety and love. he continued to cry, a high-pitched, desolate sound, pausing only to catch a gasping breath before letting the mournful sound echo across the silent plain again. He cried until his throat was dry and the effort left him trembling. His vulnerability was immense. A tawny eagle circled high above, a patient shadow waiting for the moment of collapse. A pair of jackals watched from a distant ridge, calculating the risk of approaching such a dangerous, albeit small, package. The savannah, which had seemed empty, was actually full of eyes, all observing the fate of the abandoned lion cub. His cries, his tears, his helplessness all were an open invitation to the grim finality of nature's law. As the afternoon began to soften, pulling the high sun toward the horizon, the cub's energy was nearly spent. His cries were weaker now, reduced to ragged whimpers, spaced further and further apart. He rested his head on the dusty ground, the movement costing him too much effort. He closed his eyes, accepting the creeping exhaustion that threatened to pull him into a permanent sleep. It seemed this was where his short, intense life would end, a tragedy unseen, unheard, a footnote in the endless cycle of the savannah. This is a story about more than just a little lost cub. It's about how the greatest forces of nature sometimes choose to defy their own rules, about compassion that crosses the lines of species and instinct, and about a truth that was so powerful it broke the hearts of all who witnessed it. Stories like this, where the wild reveals its capacity for deep, unexpected empathy, are why we share these moments. If you find yourself moved by the sheer will of life and the majesty of the animal kingdom, please take a moment right now, subscribe to the channel, and give this video a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring more of these incredible, hidden dramas of the wild to light, ensuring these powerful tales of survival and connection can reach more people who care, just like you. It truly makes a difference. Now, back to the silent, desperate plains. Miles away, moving with the slow, deliberate pace of a mountain, was Nala. Nala was a matriarch elephant, 80 years old, possessed of a memory that spanned droughts and floods, birth and death. She was leading her small herd, her sister, a few younger females, and their calves toward a well-known watering hole hidden deep within a thicket of fever trees. Nala's senses were vast and complex. She could feel the faint tremor of distant thunder through the soles of her feet, smelled water from miles away, and hear sounds far beyond the range of human hearing. But it was not a seismic rumble or the scent of rain that made her pause. It was a sound she was hearing with her immense, flapped ears, a sound that was small, high-pitched, and profoundly wrong. It was the intermittent, thin cry of the lion cub. The other elephants in her line continued to march, their movements governed by the rigid schedule of necessity. But Nala stopped. She tilted her head, her massive ear cocked like a sail in the light breeze, filtering the competing sounds of the savannah. The whir of insects, the lowing of buffalo, the crackle of dry thorns underfoot. The cry was unmistakable, the distress call of a baby. Her instinct was a complex tapestry. Lions were killers, the primary threat to her calves, quick shadows that needed to be chased, stomped, or broken. Yet, the sound emanating from the horizon was not a roar of aggression or the snarl of a predator. It was the purest pitch of abandonment. It cut through the protective armor of her ancient, hard-won wisdom. Nala stood for a long moment, a towering sentinel against the setting sun. She was wrestling with generations of instinct, with the deep ingrained survival imperative that dictated her relationship with the great cat. But the sound persisted, small, broken, and agonizingly alone. It was the sound of a Shaila of the savannah, regardless of species. With a silent, almost imperceptible shift of weight, Nala changed her direction. She let out a low, vibrating rumble, a sound of command that only her family could fully perceive, signaling them to pause and wait. Then, with her trunk curled slightly and her great tusks pointing the way, she began to walk toward the source of the distress, leaving the safety of her herd behind. It was a journey of nearly half a mile. The air was thick and heavy, the red dust rising in slow clouds around her colossal feet. Each step she took narrowed the distance between two creatures who should never meet under such circumstances. The apex of raw physical power and a creature at the lowest ebb of life. Milo heard the approaching sound before he saw the source. It wasn't the stealthy pad of a predator's paws, but a deep, rhythmic thudding that shook the very ground beneath his belly. It was an enormous sound, a sound of overwhelming presence. He managed to lift his head, his eyes struggling to focus through the exhaustion and the lingering tears. The bush parted. What Milo saw dwarfed his understanding of the world. It was a wall of gray skin, wrinkled and ancient like the trunk of a great baobab tree. It was the largest creature he had ever encountered. A moving mountain with curved white weapons and a dangling, muscular limb that swayed like a heavy snake. It was Nala, and she had arrived. Milo did not roar. He did not snarl. He had no strength left for aggression or defense. The sight of the massive creature, combined with the extreme hunger and fear that had hollowed him out, caused his small body to shudder violently. He tried to scramble back further into the thorns, but his legs failed him. He lay pinned by terror, his whimpers cut short by the sheer, crushing reality of his situation. Nala stopped about 10 feet away. She was close enough, but her shadow fell completely over the tiny cub, providing the first real shade he had felt all day. She stood silent, motionless, a study in massive, controlled power. Her large, intelligent eyes of a being who had seen and remembered everything stared down at the pathetic ball of spotted fur and bone. The cub watched her, expecting the end to come instantly, a casual stamp of her foot, a bored flick of her trunk. But the moment passed, and then another. Nala did nothing. She simply stood, observing the results of the savannah's cruelty. Her breathing was the only sound now, a deep, rhythmic rush of air. Milo, unable to sustain the tension of his terror, let out a final, heart-breaking squeak, a thin, almost silent plea that carried more emotional weight than any thunderous roar. It was the sound of complete surrender. Nala lowered her head. She extended her trunk, slowly, deliberately, a vast, flexible sensor moving toward the terrified, whimpering lion cub. It was an action heavy with meaning, the crossing of an ancient, species-dividing line. The trunk hovered inches above the cub's head, and the cub, too weak to move, simply closed his eyes and awaited contact. This was the moment of truth, the point where instinct had to decide between life and death. The warm, leathery tip of the elephant's trunk gently nudged the cub's side. It was not a violent push or a defensive test. It was an inquiry, a touch of immense, gentle power. The cub felt the rough, unfamiliar sensation, and instead of flinching, something in that touch, something in the sheer, unhurried carefulness of the giant calmed his frantic pulse. Nala shifted her weight, making a soft inquiring sound through her trunk, a sound elephants used to check on their own young. She smelled the cub's desperation, the raw fear, and the unmistakable scent of a very, very young creature in deep need. She could easily have ended his suffering. She could have simply walked away. But something in his tears and the haunting echo of the terrible roar she had heard much earlier in the day compelled her to stay. She nudged him again, a soft invitation to reveal the full extent of his distress, and Milo, gathering the last of his strength, opened his eyes again, looking not at a monster, but into the deep, compassionate gaze of the immense gray protector hovering above him. He had found something he had not even dared to dream of finding: intervention. And this intervention was the start of a journey that would reveal a heartbreaking truth about his mother's fate. The gentle pressure of Nala's trunk was the first comforting sensation Milo had experienced since the world fractured around him. It was a rough, warm touch, utterly unlike the velvet warmth of his mother's body, yet it carried an undeniable message of safety. The cub, still trembling, leaned slightly into the vast, protective barrier of the elephant's leg. He was too exhausted, too dehydrated, and too far gone in desperation to retain the instinctual fear of a lifetime. His body's pain simply overrode the laws of the wild. Nala, the ancient matriarch, understood this exhaustion. She sensed the cub was teetering on the edge. Her first task was not protection from predators, but protection from the sun. With a swift, efficient movement, she lumbered slightly forward, turning her colossal body so that her shadow completely enveloped the tiny lion. It was a simple act, yet monumental in its grace, providing immediate, crucial relief from the relentless heat that had been draining Milo's life force. Next, she required water. Elephants used their trunks with a delicacy that defies their size. Nala curled the end of her trunk and inserted it into her own mouth, drawing a small amount of clear water she had been carrying. She then positioned the tip of her trunk a few inches from Milo's face and let a slow, steady stream of water trickle onto the dusty ground near his nose. Milo, too weak to lap, only felt the dampness, but the cool moisture was a shock to his system. Nala repeated the action, this time letting a drop fall directly onto his lips. It was enough. The instinct to survive flared up. He managed a tiny, weak lick, then another, drawing in the life-saving fluid. She continued this patient, measured delivery of water for several minutes, giving the cub only small amounts to prevent shock to his system. Around them, the savannah held its breath. The jackals had vanished. The tawny eagle flew away, defeated by the sudden, immovable presence of the elephant. Nothing dared approach the zone of silence surrounding Nala and her unlikely charge. The law of the jungle had met a higher law, the law of maternal protection. Meanwhile, back at the point where Nala had left them, her herd was growing restless. They were creatures of schedule, driven by the need to find water before the sun fell completely. Maya, Nala's sister, the second oldest and the most cautious, let out a deep, questioning rumble. It was a worried sound calling to Nala, asking why she had abandoned the group for an unknown distraction. Nala answered with an even deeper, more resonant rumble that traveled through the earth, an era sound that was both an assurance of her safety and an unyielding command to wait. She was busy. For nearly an hour, Nala did nothing but stand guard, providing shade and offering tiny sips of water. As the light changed, casting long, purple shadows, the cub, Milo, began to stir with renewed energy. His whimpers ceased, replaced by a soft, needy purr, the first true sound of a lion cub he had made since he realized he was lost. It was a purr meant for a mother's belly, a sound of comfort and belonging, and he directed it instinctively toward the massive gray flank of the elephant. Nala sensed the change. She nudged him again, guiding him gently to his feet. Milo was still wobbly, but he was standing. His small, spotted tail gave a tentative twitch. Nala knew they couldn't stay. The small amount of water she had provided would not sustain him, and the scent of a helpless cub would soon bring back the unwanted attention of scavengers after dark. They had to find either his pride or help. But where to go? Nala's internal compass, honed by decades of matriarchal duty, began to focus on the distant memory of the terrible sound that had drawn her here in the first place, the sound of a desperate, furious lioness fighting for her life. That sound, she knew, was the only clue to the cub's family. Before she began to move, Nala took one final, deliberate action. She used her trunk to gently dust the cub's face and back, rubbing away the thick coat of dried mud and dust. It was an act of grooming, an acknowledgement of the cub's need for care, and an effort to soothe his raw, exposed nerves. It was in that moment when the colossal elephant delicately cleaned the terrified lion cub that the true, irreversible bond of this rescue was forged. They were no longer just two animals in the savannah. They were protector and protected, united by a moment of profound cross-species empathy. The journey began. Nala did not carry Mila. She simply shielded him. She walked slowly, at a pace a small cub could manage, keeping her body between Milo and the open savanna, a moving fortress of wrinkled gray skin and ivory. Milo, his confidence boosted by the presence of his giant guard, trotted gamely alongside her immense legs, always staying within the protective cone of her presence, occasionally stumbling, but never falling far from the safety net of her shadow. The trek was immediately complicated. They crossed a dusty clearing, and the scent of the rival male lion that had scattered Milo's pride was still heavy in the air, mixed with the acrid, metallic smell of fresh trouble. Nala stopped. Her ears flared wide, recognizing the danger instantly. This was the scent of a rogue, a powerful, solitary male driven by aggression, the same one that had caused Milo's mother to make her stand. This is a path fraught with danger, a journey only the most experienced and compassionate creatures would dare to undertake. We are witnessing an incredible act of animal heroism, where one creature willingly puts herself at risk to save the life of a hereditary enemy. If this story is touching your heart, and if you believe in the power of empathy and courage in the wild, please make sure you are subscribed to our channel right now. Don't miss the conclusion of Milo's story, and hit that like button to spread this emotional rescue across YouTube. Every subscription helps us share these vital stories of the savannah's hidden heart. Thank you for being part of this journey. Now, back to Nala and Milo. Nala emitted a warning sound, a low, powerful rumble that vibrated through the ground. It was not aimed at Milo, but at the potential threat still lingering in the air. The sound itself was enough to clear any smaller scavengers from the area. Milo, sensing the shift in his protector's posture, pressed closer to Nala's foot, a small, furry anchor in the face of an unseen threat. They continued, but Nala was now using her incredible olfactory sense to track the narrative of the fight. She was following the path Milo's mother had taken when she led the cubs to safety, and then the path the rival male had taken during the confrontation. Elephants are keenly sensitive to distress, and they can interpret the subtle chemical signals left in the environment. Nala smelled not just lion, but the sharp, hot scent of combat, the smell of adrenaline, and a deep underlying scent that made her slow her steps even more. They were moving deeper into a rocky, more secluded Ariata site of the initial confrontation. The ground was disturbed here, the grass matted down in a violent circle. Nala stopped, her huge body creating a complete barrier around Milo. She lowered her trunk again, sweeping it back and forth over the churned soil. Her eyes were focused, seeing a story that had happened hours before, told through broken branches, scrapes in the dirt, and droplets of dark, dried liquid. The atmosphere was heavy, charged with the lingering memory of violence. Milo, too, sensed the darkness. He had been calmed by Nala's presence, but now a primal anxiety returned. He began to search the ground frantically with his nose, whimpering again, not out of hunger, but out of a deep-seated recognition. He was smelling his mother. He was smelling the place where his mother had disappeared. Nala's investigation became more urgent. She followed the scent a few yards further into a denser thicket of dead wood and stone. She pushed aside a large, thorny bush with her head, and there the truth began to unfold. On a dark, unforgiving rock face, there were deep, vertical scratch marks, placed too high to be from a lioness, but perfectly aligned with the height of a dominant male. And on the ground, unmistakable now, was a heavy patch of dark red earth-dried blood. It was not the blood of the rival. That scent had moved on. The blood was concentrated, too much to be a simple scratch. It spoke of a serious wound, a desperate struggle, and a failure to recover. Nala stood over the evidence, her massive body rigid, and she let out a low, mournful, trumpetous sound that was a lament for a fellow mother, a recognition of courage, and a deep sigh of grief. The trumpet was not angry or fearful, it was heartbreakingly sad. She nudged Milo gently away from the scene. She did not want the cub to linger on this painful truth. But Milo, his entire tiny being driven by the scent of his mother, scrambled back toward the spot. He sniffed the blood-stained rock, then the ground, and finally let out a cry that was not the weak cry of a lost cub, but a profound, gut-wrenching wail of true, realized loss. His tears returned, flooding his eyes as the horrifying truth of his mother's fate washed over him. A tragedy Nala now confirmed with her silent, powerful grief. The cub had cried for a lost mother, but now he cried for a fallen hero. And Nala knew, with the certainty of her ancient wisdom, that the rescue of Myola had just become something far greater than finding his pride. It had become an act of profound protection and surrogate love. The sun was a massive, bleeding orb sinking below the horizon, painting the savannah in shades of tragic orange and deep, sorrowful violet. At the sight of the confrontation, the air was heavy with the dust of battle and the lingering smell of loss. Milo's tiny body shook as he processed the devastating truth revealed by the bloody rock and Nala's mournful trumpet. The tears that stained his dusty fur were no longer from thirst or hunger, but from the realization that his mother, his whole world, would not be coming back. Nala nudged him again, this time with a firm but gentle determination. Grief was a luxury they could not afford in this exposed spot. She had witnessed the end of the lioness's fight. Now she had to secure the future of the cub. With her immense size, she blocked the dreadful sight from Milo, forcing him to focus on her presence, her towering protection. The path forward was now clear. They had to find Nala's herd. Only within the safety of the elephant family could the cub survive the long, dangerous night. Nala began to move, slowly and deliberately retracing her steps back towards where she had left Maya and the others. This time, Milo followed without hesitation. He no longer saw a terrifying giant. He saw his fortress, his unexpected, massive guardian. He trotted close to the shelter of her legs, his every step mirroring the rhythm of her powerful walk. It took time to rejoin the herd. When Maya finally saw her ancient matriarch returning and realized the tiny, spotted companion trotting under Nala's belly, she let out a loud, astonished, trumpeting sound. It was a noise of confusion, disbelief, and alarm. A lion Kobe. Lions were the enemy, the snatchers of calves, creatures to be trampled, not protected. Nala responded with a series of deep, calming rumbles, communicating a message of peace and immediate acceptance. She conveyed the cub's helplessness, the violence of his mother's end, and the absolute necessity of his survival. It was a rare, powerful moment of interspecies communication, broadcast across the elephant family's intricate network of memory and empathy. The rest of the herd gathered around, their massive bodies forming a ring. They sniffed the air, their trunks reaching out, curious and cautious. The smaller calves, however, reacted with immediate, childish fear, pressing close to their mothers. But Nala was resolute. She stood firm, creating a protective enclosure for Milo. If they accepted her, they had to accept her decision. Maya approached first, her caution warring with her loyalty to Nala. She lowered her trunk, sniffing Milo from a safe distance. The cub, still dazed but protected, instinctively let out a low growl, the last remnants of his species' fighting spirit. Maya recoiled slightly, but Nala placed her enormous foot down with a soft thud, a non-aggressive signal of warning and ownership. Maya understood. The matriarch had claimed the cub. As darkness fell completely, the elephants settled into their sleeping formation. Their immense bodies created a mobile fort, an impenetrable circle against the dangers of the night. Nala knelt slightly, using her leg as a windbreak, and Milo, utterly exhausted, curled up against the warm, rough skin of her ankle. The noise of her huge boditha, soft chewing, the deep, rattling breath, the occasional flap of her ear was not terrifying. It was the sound of life, massive and enduring. But protection was not enough. The cub needed food. He was a creature designed for the thick, rich milk of a lioness, not the plants and water Nala could offer. The matriarch knew her limits. Her rescue was temporary, a bridge to a solution. As the first faint gray of dawn touched the sky, Nala made her next move. She had protected the cub from the rival male, from scavengers, and from the cold. Now, she had to lead him to human help. Nala led the herd toward the distant outline of a permanent ranger station, a place where she knew compassionate hands and resources existed. This was a massive risk. Elephants generally avoid human settlements, and leading her herd into this area was a calculated gamble. But Nala's singular focus was the survival of the small king under her watch. The final stretch of the journey was slow. The cub was stumbling again, his hunger becoming unbearable. Nala, sensing his weakness, did something extraordinary. She used her trunk to gently lift Milo, holding him briefly aloft, then placing him on the soft, dusty ground just ahead of her footfalls. It was a way to urge him forward without exhausting him further. Finally, they arrived at the periphery of the protected area. The distant sound of a jeep engine could be heard. Nala stopped the herd behind a large Kapya Rakya Matrala natural screen. She then walked forward alone, Milo trotting faithfully beside her. A young man named John, a wildlife conservationist who had spent his life among the great animals of the Mara, was on his morning patrol. He was the first human to see the unbelievable sight, an enormous matriarch elephant standing sentinel, and tucked into the shadow of her leg, a whimpering, spotted lion cub. John stopped his jeep, his breath catching in his throat. He had seen many things in his career, but this defied all known behavior. He watched, frozen, as the elephant nudged the cub forward, a silent but unmistakable offering. Nala then turned her massive head and looked directly at John. It was a look that conveyed the entire story: the trauma, the loss, the desperate protection. It was a plea the truth laid bare. She had done all she could. The cub was no longer a predator. He was a desperate orphan, and the elephant was handing him over to the next layer of protection. John understood instantly. He knew the signs of the rogue male, the territorial battles that often leave behind such tragedies. He slowly, respectfully, killed the engine of his jeep and got out, moving with the utmost care, keeping his posture submissive. Nala waited until John had successfully approached Milo, who was now too weak and trusting to run. The cub, recognizing the gentle, slow movements of the man, and perhaps sensing Nala's approval, simply collapsed onto the dusty ground, resting his head on his paws, safe but spent. John carefully scooped up the tiny, trembling cub. Milo was lighter than he should be, his ribs showing through his thin coat, but his eyes were clear, and his small heart was still beating strongly. As John turned back toward his jeep with Milo safe in his arms, Nala took a final, deep breath. She let out a soft, final rumbler sound of farewell, of duty fulfilled, of shared grief. She watched the man and the cub until they were secure in the vehicle, and then, without another sound, she turned. Nala walked back to the kopje, rejoined her waiting herd, and together they continued their journey to the watering hole, the needs of their family taking precedence once more. The massive footprint of the elephant and the tiny, spotted print of the lion cub separated. Their intertwined journey concluded. Milo's tears had been dried by the shade of an elephant. His life, saved by an ancient law of compassion that defied every rule of the savannah. He would go on to be raised in the sanctuary, a living testament to the monumental truth that courage and kindness can be found in the wildest, most unexpected places, even between the most ancient of rivals. And the greatest truth of all was the simplest. The lion cub had cried for his lost mother, but it took the heart of a passing elephant to hear the truth in his tears and turn a tragedy into a tale of enduring hope. The rescue was complete, and the memory of the fallen lioness, a heroic mother, lived on in the survival of her son.